Hello and welcome to Schizophrenia Lesson 6, where we are going to look at the management of schizophrenia through token economy systems. So we're going to cover what token economies are, how they work, what the point is, and then finish off with some evaluation points and a 6-mark outline. Token economies are reward systems based on behaviorist principles, and they're used to manage maladaptive behavior patterns in people with schizophrenia. Maladaptive behaviors are behaviors that stop you from adapting to a new or difficult circumstance. So they can be unhelpful behaviors or unproductive behaviors, that kind of thing. And these behaviors generally develop through extended periods of time in hospital. Now, token economies were used a lot during the 60s and 70s because long-term hospitalization was the normal way of dealing with psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia. But their use has declined over the years with the rise of ethical concerns surrounding their use, but also due to the fact that most people with schizophrenia are actually cared for outside of hospital, for example, by family members. Now, the process is very, very simple. When patients carry out a desirable behavior, they are immediately rewarded with a token. The immediate receiving of the token is very, very important because if you delay the reward, the effectiveness of that reward is reduced. The target behaviors that are going to be modified are specific and individual to each patient because obviously not everybody will display the same maladaptive behavior that needs changing. And that's something that would be agreed on with the psychiatrist before the program starts. Now, the tokens have no value in themselves, but they can be swapped for rewards and privileges like sweets, magazines, films, walks outside, or things like meetings with a social worker that you can then use to plan life after hospital. So I just want to spend a little bit of time just making sure that everybody's happy with the theory behind it. Now, the idea is that patients in hospitals will learn new behaviors via rewards. So the theory behind token economies is specifically based on operant conditioning, because as we know, any behavior that is rewarded is likely to be repeated and learned. So like we said earlier, the tokens hold no value in themselves, but rather they gain their value through being paired with a reward. So the tokens are what's known in behaviorist terms as a secondary reinforcer. And they gain their power through being paired with a primary reinforcer, which is the reward in this case. So the pairing generally happens at the start of the program, and it usually means that the token and the reward are administered together so that the patient knows and understands the connection between the two. But then as the program starts getting underway, obviously the secondary reinforcer, the token, is presented first, and then the patients can then exchange those secondary reinforcers for film time or magazines or walks or whatever, and those are the primary reinforcers, the rewards for their behavior. Now, the rationale behind token economy systems is the problem of institutionalization. Now, I kind of alluded to this before, but institutionalization refers to the development of maladaptive behaviors, unhelpful behaviors, unproductive behaviors, whatever you want to call it, which arises from spending extended periods of time in hospital, which, again, like I said earlier, was the norm for people with schizophrenia in the 60s and 70s. So, for example, people may stop maintaining good hygiene, or they may stop socializing with others, which, to be fair, is understandable if you consider that they're living without the routine and the small pleasures associated with everyday life. Matson et al. In 2016 identified 3 categories of institutional behavior that is generally targeted by token economy systems. You've got personal care, for example, getting showered and dressed every day. You've got condition-related behavior, for example, apathy or avolition. And then you have social behavior, things like talking to people, striking up conversations, joining in with games, or that kind of stuff. Now, it's important to understand that behavior modification is not a cure for schizophrenia, but it is designed to improve a number of things for the patient. For example, it's designed to improve a patient's life within the hospital setting. And it's also designed to make it easier to adapt back into life in the community after your stay in hospital has ended. Okay, and then just to finish off, we have a little bit of research for you. So, token economies was demonstrated by Ilon and Nasrin in 1968 on a ward of women with schizophrenia. They effectively did exactly what we've just been talking about. So every time the women carried out a task like making their bed, they received a token, and on the side of that token it said one gift. They were then able to swap their token for a gift or for a privilege of some kind. And then that resulted over time in the number of positive tasks being carried out increasing. But, like I said before, the use of token economies has decreased massively over the years due to not only a change in care routines, but also due to an increasing rise of ethical issues that are associated with token economies, and we'll talk about those ethical issues a little bit later on in the evaluation section. Okay, so that is your outline, and I will show you what that looks like in a 6-mark question towards the end of the video. But for now, let's have a look at a couple of evaluation points. So I've got 3 evaluation points for you, 1 strength and 2 limitations. So your first strength is the evidence for effectiveness. So in 2016, you had a meta-analysis of 7 high-quality studies that had been conducted between 1999 and 2003 on the effectiveness of token economies for people with chronic mental health issues. They were all done in a hospital setting, and all studies showed a reduction in the negative symptoms and a decline in the frequency of unwanted behaviours, which overall supports the value of token economies. Now, of course, they only used 7 studies, so that makes us question the quality of that evidence, because 7 studies is actually quite a small evidence base to support the effectiveness of any technique. Small numbers of studies result in something called the file draw problem. And the file draw problem is a bias towards positive published findings, because it effectively means that undesirable results have been filed away into the drawer. So if you've only got 7 studies that have got good quality results, or good quality studies that have got positive results, then actually, where are the rest of the studies? Chances are those studies have been published and have then been put in a drawer somewhere because actually their results maybe aren't very good. So that means that there is a serious question about the evidence of the effectiveness of token economies, because 7 studies is not a massive amount, and it raises the question as to where the other studies are and whether or not those studies actually had undesirable results rather than positive results. And then the ethical issues that I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, token economies does give professionals considerable power to control the behaviour of the patient. You are effectively imposing a norm on an individual, and that can be quite problematic if the issues aren't approached sensitively. So for example, an individual might want to look maybe a little bit scruffy. An individual might want to not have a shower every day. An individual might want to stay in their pajamas, and it might just be the way that it is. However, if you start telling them that they're not allowed to do that anymore, then it kind of means that you're restricting their personal freedoms a little bit as well. Then it kind of means you are restricting their personal freedoms, which is obviously problematic. You've also got the problem that token economies work quite nicely with patients who experience fairly mild symptoms, because they can access the token economy program quite nicely. However, patients who have got the most distressing symptoms could actually have a worse time of it, because not only are they experiencing the most distressing symptoms, but now they're also experiencing the removal of small pleasures in their day-to-day life, because actually their symptoms are so bad that they can't access the token economy system, and therefore they're not getting access to their rewards either. Okay, so it creates this almost element of discrimination towards the patients who experience the most distressing forms of psychiatric conditions. So that's led to things like legal action being taken by relatives of the patients, and ultimately the decline of the use of token economies. So that means that the impact on personal freedom and the impact on the short-term quality of life might outweigh the benefits that could come from using a token economy system. Okay, so just before we finish off then, I have a possible 6-mark outline for you. Obviously this topic could come up in paper 3, and paper 3 is full of essays, so it's possible that you might get an essay on this. If you do get an essay on it, then you're going to need to write a 6-mark outline, so let's have a little look at what that could look like. As a general rule, 6-mark outlines, you should be looking at about 150 to 175 words. Any more than that and you'll probably run out of time. Any less than that and you won't get the appropriate depth, breadth trade-off in terms of the amount of details that you're going to be able to put in. So, token economies are a form of behavior modification and they're based on operant conditioning principles. Just a little bit of an introductory sentence just to kind of get you started. Then a little bit of information about how it works, so the fact that people get tokens when they carry out a desirable behavior, which they can exchange for rewards. Moving on, in my third paragraph I have some keywords related to behaviorism and also related to the use of token economies, so things like institutionalization, secondary reinforcers and primary reinforcers. Okay, so this is kind of the paragraph where you get to throw in your keywords and your key phrases just to show an examiner that you know them and that you can use them appropriately. In my final paragraph, I then finish off with Matson et al. And just say that they can target 3 types of undesirable behavior and say what they are, and then finishing off by saying that token economies don't cure schizophrenia, but they do have 2 major benefits, and then say what those benefits are. Now, the reality is there are multiple ways in which you can write an outline. And 9 times out of 10, the mark schemes from AQA kind of give a guide about what should go in, but there are a lot of different ways in which you can do it. So, for example, you could substitute maybe that last paragraph and add in the research by Ilon and Nasrin. Okay, that would be perfectly acceptable and you would definitely get marks for it. I've chosen in mine not to add the research because I find it easier to talk about the theory without adding in the research. But like I said, it would not be wrong to put the research in and you would definitely get the marks for it. If you write very, very quickly and you don't struggle to write essays, you could even add the research by Ilon and Nasrin onto the end of what's already there, but you've just got to bear in mind that that will take a little bit longer to do. Your outline will therefore be a little bit longer, and obviously it could cut into the time that you've got to actually answer the rest of your questions on the paper. Okay, but if you think that you can do that and that you won't run out of time, then by all means go ahead and do it, because then you will quite literally have covered everything. Okay, so that is the end of the video. I hope that's all been useful for you, and I hope there's stuff in there that is helpful. If you've got any questions, then please feel free to put them in the comment section below, and I will do my best to get back to you ASAP. Okay, I hope it's been useful. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.